Excited to be joined by David Harrison of Locked On Commanders today. We're getting a little impromptu crossover segment here on Locked On 49ers, Locked On Commanders. Brian Peacock of Locked On 49ers with David Harrison of Locked On Commanders. And we didn't get to do this last week, but with the 49ers bye, it's still very timely. And just found out Chase Young's going to be wearing jersey number 92. So
Okay.
appreciate you jumping on with me today, David Harrison, to talk about Chase Young and what he meant to the Commanders, how he ended up a San Francisco 49er. Just big picture, really quick, David, from the Commanders' perspective. Obviously, new ownership, a lot could potentially be changing. I was kind of shocked seeing Sweat and Young get traded. Was it the same for you folks around the Commanders? Because it sounds like something that could be a long-term rebuild happening in Washington.
Yeah, I think most people around here, we expected one of the guys to probably be traded. As the conversations and the rumors, continue to build. I mean, talking to the two guys in the locker rooms, leading up to the Philadelphia game, and then especially after the Philadelphia game. I mean, Chase. I think Chase was a little bit more kind of in control of his emotions. He's been through some things here in DC, so he's kind of used to having to answer tough questions and a little bit of dramatics behind what we're talking to him about. But Montez, you can see that he was emotional. You know what I mean? Following the loss of the Eagles, he was the last player off the field, and that's never something that you see in Montez. And then just talking to him after the game, he was still answering the questions as a what if, but there was more of a when it happens tone to things. I think most people expected Montez Sweat to be the one traded, to be quite honest with you, because he was going to fetch more in compensation. So you would still have one defensive end in Chase Young, who obviously has the really high ceiling and the athletic tools to be a great pass rusher in the league. But then you would also get the better draft compensation by moving Montez Sweat, and essentially the decision that everyone was dreading in the offseason of which one do you sign, which one do you not sign, because the assumption is that you're not going to be able to pay both of those guys, around or north of $20 million that they're going to want, would basically be made for you. And either Chase Young would get re-signed, franchise tagged, or, worst case scenario, he would not pan out and they would let him walk and wait for a compensatory pick in 2025. But the team decided to move both of them, and there's some reasons that you might think that they did move both of them, and some reasons why people might disagree with moving both of them. But at the end of the day, both men are moving on, and the Washington Commanders are shifting the way that they're building their roster. I don't think it's a full rebuild. I think I would call it more of a refocusing. I would think of how they're going to dedicate their resources moving forward.
Okay, went with a different I thought you were going to say retooled, refocusing. I like that.
Yeah.
That's you should be on the PR team for Washington.
Yeah.
The fans are like, "What the hell are you guys doing right now, trading these players?" So and Montez Sweat, as recent as since then, re-signed with the Chicago Bears, and nice contract for Montez Sweat. And Montez Sweat's a good player. The ceiling might not be as high as someone like Chase Young, as you mentioned, and he's been a good pass rusher, really good against the run, sort of a complete player. My question would be, how is Montez Sweat so much more valuable to the Commanders or other teams, obviously around the league, to have a high second round pick valuation or a very late comp pick, third round valuation in trade for a guy who not that long ago was the number 2 pick in the NFL draft? So how is that value so different between those two players, and what went wrong with Chase Young that he's not worth more than a late third round pick for another team in the 4th year of his rookie contract?
Yeah, I think number one, consistency is going to be the reason behind that. Obviously health is a concern. Chase, when he injured his knee in 2021, it ended up taking him more than a year to come back, and lost in the mix of that. A lot of those conversations is the fact that he actually had 2 knee surgeries. When they repaired the injured knee, they heard against the Buccaneers, there was also damage in the other knee that they went ahead and they did some grafting and they did some repairing and did a whole bunch of stuff. So he wasn't just rehabbing 1 knee surgery; he was rehabbing 2. And I mean, when you think about it, when you're rehabbing 2 knee surgeries, there's a longer period of time where you're doing nothing because you don't have a strong leg to lean on to start rehabbing the injured leg. You now have 2 injured legs. There's no third leg to use to be able to rehab those 2 injuries. So I think that contributed to it. There were obviously reports of setbacks and stuff while he was training with Von Miller that nobody here was ever able to corroborate. So it still lives in the land of rumor. But at the end of the day, he came back for a little bit at the end of 2022, but really coming into the season, Chase looked the physically he looked better than I've ever seen him in the National Football League, and that was really exciting. And he seemed like his spirits were up, but regardless of that ceiling and all that stuff, Montez Sweat, he's had a few, dings and dents here and there. He missed some time with COVID. He had a family loss, unfortunately, that cost him some time a couple years ago. But for the most part, he's been the much more available player. And Brian, as well as anybody that you have the greatest talent in the world on your roster, but if they're not on the field, it doesn't really do you a whole lot of good. So I think that's honestly, I think that's reason number one why they were able to get more for Montez, because when you look at him, you're the Chicago Bears, you kind of know what you're getting. Now, at the same time, you also know what you're getting. Like you said, I think Tez is kind of more so than not. I think he's kind of reached his ceiling. I think we kind of just know who Montez Sweat is going to be, and that's not bad. But with Chase Young, you still see the potential for growth there. And if San Francisco can tap into what remaining growth he has this season, I don't know what their plans are long term. That's something I'm interested to hear from you. But if even just for this season, if they can tap into more of that potential than Washington was able to, then they've got themselves a pretty good pass rusher.
Yeah, consistency is so important. You said something there which was interesting because you're talking about his injuries, and I didn't even know about the second knee injury. So that's fascinating, and could obviously and is the big reason why it took him a little bit longer to come back. But you said physically he looked the best he'd been in the National Football League. So do you think he's back physically? Because that was something I was worried about. I was like, okay, former number 2 overall pick, but if the injury was so devastating that he's not that guy anymore, then that should probably alter some of the expectations the 49ers and 49ers fans have about what Chase Young could be the rest of the season.
Yeah, physically, I think he's great. I think he's fine physically, and I was really excited for him. I'm still excited for him. I don't say I was like I'm not anymore. Like I'm still excited for him to be in the physical condition that he is, and I think that's really important for him. I think the reason though that you end up seeing him, moved on from Washington, like I said, one it's the reallocation of money and draft picks. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? They have 4 first-round picks on the defensive line alone, 6 first-round picks in their defense. And I'll be honest, their defense is not playing like a defense with 6 first-round picks. And so now you face the prospect of dumping, I would say dumping, but investing, 30 to 40 million more dollars and trying to keep these two in the offseason. And granted, you got north of $80 million in cap space to work with, but do you want to spend half of that on 2 guys on the defensive line? That's one of the worst defenses in the NFL. That doesn't make a lot of business sense. And Josh Harris, the new owner of the Commanders, he's a businessman first and foremost. So I think that's really the biggest push to get this done. And then also you get that 3rd round. It's a compensatory pick, right, from the 49ers. So you get a 3rd round pick back, but you don't get a 2025 3rd round compensatory pick. You get a 2024 compensatory pick. And let's be honest, that compensatory pick they're getting is ahead of any compensatory pick they would have even gotten in 2025, numerically. So that's that. I think that's the biggest reason. And then of course there's the reports, and I hate this part of our journalistic community, but when guys leave, there tend to be reports here and there that come out that for whatever reason didn't come out beforehand of maybe Chase wasn't, clicking with the coaching staff, maybe wasn't clicking within Jack Del Rio's defensive scheme, doing a little bit of freelancing. And I'm not going to say that none of that is true, but I don't think that's the biggest reason that this move was made. And I think that, Chase Young having the opportunity to go to another team that's a contender. I mean, playing for contenders always kind of makes guys toe the line a little bit easier, when that's why so many people go to Bill Belichick and then have a lesser attitude issue than maybe they had elsewhere, because I might get a Lombardi. But also playing with this guy, Nick Bosa, like Nick is a leader on that team, and he knows Chase. He knows how to talk to Chase. He knows how to work with Chase. So if Chase, for whatever reason, does try to go outside the script, Nick is going to know how to say, hey, buddy, like, you need to follow the rules of my house, because this is where you are now.
Yeah, expectations are different with the 49ers. And, it was already a really good defensive line, so it's not like he's going to get less attention with the 49ers defensive line because there was already so talented where he was. But Nick Bosa stayed back in Santa Clara with Chase Young to try to get him ready after the bye to jump in. And I'm sure he could play a full complement of snaps if the coaching staff wants him to in week 10 after that bye, after being traded to the San Francisco 49ers. It's really interesting what you said there, because the reports from Mike Silver of the Chronicle locally, and he said they came from Washington Commanders coaches. So I don't know if it's sour grapes. It's hard to lean too much into that with anonymous quotes, but it said it came from Washington's coaching staff. And when you look at, high picks that are busts, and I'm sure there's some people that called Chase Young certain things. about whether he was a bust or disappointing or whatever. It's generally you should be worth more than a late third round pick if you're a defensive end drafted number 2 overall, during your
Mhm.
rookie contract. So, somewhat disappointing how his career went. And if you look at historically busts in the NFL, it's, injuries or motivation, So it
Yeah.
was like, okay, maybe that's the part of it then, effort and motivation. Just from an effort standpoint, like just watching the film, watching him play. Has that been something you noticed where it's like, oh, he's not really even trying to, you know, hold up against the run. He doesn't have that dog in him, right? Is that something you noticed?
Yeah, the criticism talking about the Mike Silver report, the criticism of Chase Young, for in those specific aspects, like it's not really new. It's just being presented in a new way because of all the trades that have happened and everything.
Mhm.
But I mean, if you go back to 2021, I want to say I think it was like early 2021, maybe even late 2020. Jack Del Rio was making comments publicly about certain members of the defense playing off script, freelancing, trying to be the hero instead of just doing their job. And he never said, "I'm talking about Chase Young," but a lot of connections were made to Chase Young. And that's where you hope that he takes that next step with the San Francisco 49ers. And I truly believe he's going to take that next step with the 49ers. And then whether or not he stays there in 2024 or moves on, I think that's going to help him moving forward in his career. Because when you turn on the tape, there are times, I've always kind of said Chase Young picks and chooses when he wants to be full Chase and when he wants to be half Chase, and there are situations where you turn on the all 22 and you see him, if he gets stopped on his first move, he doesn't really go to a second move, doesn't keep the legs churning. He kind of stops and if you just see it once or twice, you kind of look at it like, oh, well, he's just turning himself into like a spy so he could knock the pass down or maybe chase the quarterback. And sure, but the amount of times that you see it on tape, that's not what it is, and that's not the scheme. And when you see guys like James Smith Williams, Casey Hill come in, they're not executing the same thing. Montez Sweat on the opposite side isn't doing the same thing. So when you have one defensive end out of a group of 5, 6, 7 on tape that is doing the anomaly, typically means that guy is the anomaly, not the scheme being the anomaly. But again, that bust label, I mean, it's going to be there. He didn't make it to the end of his rookie year. So that's something that he's going to have to own. And what I hope is that both sides, the organization realizes there are some systemic failures in their part, because this isn't a player that Ron Rivera's regime inherited. This was their first round pick. You know what I mean? So I hope the organization acknowledges the mistakes that they made in this process, but also not Montez, Chase comes out of it and accepts and owns his part of why this didn't work out in Washington as well, because that's the way he's going to become a better player in San Francisco, because we all expect him to ball out in San Francisco, and for the conversation to then turn into, oh man, look how terrible the Commanders coaches are, because this is a real Chase Young that we're now seeing. But I think a combination of having that embarrassment to carry of being traded before the end of your first rookie deal or your rookie deal, the injury, the chip on your shoulder of being counted out, and then of course being on a contender. I think those three things alone should be a catalyst for us to see a better version of Chase Young. And while Commanders fans are going to be frustrated for it just because of the guy, I'm super excited to see if that's true.
Yeah, I'm excited. I'm even more excited to watch number 92 play for the 49ers now after talking with you, David, than before, because if he's still that prospect and that's still in there, and motivation is huge. And at the same time, like, how many times have you ever heard about a guy who could go crazy for 4 months and earn 50, 100 extra $1 million, compared to what he might get? It's pretty
Yeah.
amazing the situation he's in. And I don't know if he's in the long-term plans for the 49ers, probably remains to be seen. But you mentioned the compensation. I think it just made sense for the 49ers too, to say, okay, look, if it's going to, we have extra picks, we have extra comp picks. We can send a comp pick and maybe he walks and, that 2025 comp pick you talked about, we get one later anyway. I mean, that's well
Yeah.
worth it for a team that's trying to compete right now. So I guess that's how they landed on the compensation. And I would have thought Chase Young would have gotten more. And I'm also
Mhm.
still shocked that Washington traded both of those guys. And I thought, man, this must be buyer beware if they're willing to move on from Chase Young and don't want to see this out and maybe sign him again. But talking to you, knowing that the athleticism and explosion is still there. I mean, that's exciting. That's got to be super exciting for 49ers fans, man. So I can't wait till I see Chase Young on the field, see what he can be for the San Francisco 49ers. And David, always a pleasure chatting with you. Appreciate you jumping on and giving some insight to our listeners about the newest San Francisco 49er and Chase Young.
Yes, sir.